My dad fired me to promote his mistress. I took every client with me. My own father looked me dead in the eye and fired me from the company I'd spent my entire adult life building. The company that bore our family name. The reason he gave me? So he could promote his mistress into a role I created. He had the audacity to tell me that while I may have built the system, he owned it. He truly believed that gave him all the power. What he failed to understand, what he had completely forgotten, was that the clients, the lifeblood of our business, their loyalty wasn't to a brand. It was with me. And I was about to teach my father a very, very expensive lesson in what happens when you betray the one person who made you successful. If you love a good story about the tables getting turned and justice being served, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because you are not going to want to miss a single detail of how this whole thing played out. For 15 years, my entire world, my whole identity was Miller & Son Logistics. And I mean that literally. It wasn't just a job I clocked in and out of. It was the first thing I thought about when I woke up and the last thing on my mind before I fell asleep. It was who I was. My dad started it in our dusty 2-car garage with a second-hand truck and a dream. I was right there with him from the moment I could lift a box, packing shipments on summer breaks, my hands raw and my back aching. I was proud of it. It was ours. When I went off to college and graduated with a degree in software engineering, I had offers from big tech firms, companies that would have paid me a fortune. But I didn't even consider them for a second. There was no question where I was going. I came straight home filled with ideas, ready to take our humble family business and rocket it into the 21st century. When I walked back in, it was like stepping into a time capsule. We were still using paper ledgers, Rolodexes, and a fax machine that screamed like a banshee with every transmission. It was chaos. Dad was a master salesman, but he was an organizational disaster. We'd lose orders, misplace inventory, and I remember one specific, awful week where a massive shipment for our biggest client at the time went missing for 3 days simply because the paperwork fell behind a filing cabinet. That was the moment I knew things had to change, or we'd never grow beyond a small-town operation. So I got to work. For the next 2 years, I practically lived in my childhood bedroom, which I'd converted into a command center. I was pulling 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and a singular obsession: coding a custom logistics management system from the ground up. I called it the Grid. It was my masterpiece. This software became the beating heart of the company. It did everything: payroll, route optimization, real-time inventory tracking, automated invoicing, client databases, everything. It was my baby. And damn, did it work. The Grid streamlined our operations so efficiently that our profits didn't just grow, they quadrupled in just 3 years. We went from a handful of local clients to a major regional player. My dad was the face of the company, the charismatic guy who could close any deal with a firm handshake and a disarming smile. But I was the engine. I was the architect of our success, hidden away in the back, making sure the promises he made were actually kept. My official title was Chief Operations Officer, but that barely scratched the surface. I knew every client personally. I didn't just know their shipping needs. I knew their business goals, their peak seasons, their kids' names, and where they went on vacation. I remember spending a whole weekend rerouting 36 trucks because a client named Sarah had a sudden manufacturing delay, and I wanted to make sure she didn't face any late penalties from her retailers. That's the level of trust we had. They weren't just accounts on a screen. They were deep-seated relationships I had personally nurtured. All of this for a salary that was maybe half of what I could have made at a faceless corporation. I turned a blind eye to it because I believed I was building a family legacy, something I could one day pass on to my own kids. Dad and I were a team, or so I thought. At company parties, my dad would always throw a heavy arm around my shoulders, his voice booming for everyone to hear. My son here, he's the real brains of the operation. I just steer the ship. We were on top of the world, an unbeatable father-son duo. And from that height, you can't see the ground rushing up to meet you. The first crack in the foundation appeared about a year ago, and it had a name: Amber. She was hired as my dad's new executive assistant. On paper she seemed fine. In person she was polished, overly eager, and had a way of laughing at my dad's tired old jokes like they were the funniest thing she'd ever heard. At first I didn't think anything of it. Dad was getting older and he needed someone to manage his calendar. But her ambition wasn't about filing paperwork. It was a calculated, predatory climb, and I had a front row seat. Within 2 months she was no longer just an assistant. She was a fixture in high-level meetings she had no business being in, throwing out buzzwords and half-baked opinions on complex logistical issues she knew absolutely nothing about. 4 months in, she had somehow convinced my dad to give her the corner office next to his, an office that had belonged to our retiring and very respected VP of operations for 2 decades. She immediately redecorated it with this ridiculously expensive, sterile white furniture that looked like it was ripped from a magazine for people with more money than taste. The expense report for her office upgrade alone was more than some of our employees made in a month. The real problem, the line she crossed, was when she began sticking her nose directly into my operations. She'd question my carefully calibrated decisions in front of my own team, undermining my authority with a smug smile. She'd go over my head straight to my dad to get my supply chain adjustments reversed, creating chaos and confusion. The most blatant incident was when she tried to get us to switch our main freight partner to a new unvetted company that was a full 20% more expensive. Why? Because it was run by a friend of hers. I spent a full day putting together a detailed cost analysis, a multi-page report with hard data proving how catastrophic this move would be to our bottom line. I presented it to my dad, expecting him to see reason. He just waved it off without even reading past the first page. "Let's give Amber's people a try," he said, not meeting my eye. "We need to be open to new ideas." It was a disaster. The new company was unreliable, their trucks were late, and it cost us thousands in rush fees to fix their mistakes. It wasn't just bad business, it got deeply personal. She started hijacking my client relationships. She'd invite herself to my lunches, inserting herself into conversations and trying to take credit for solutions I had developed. It was so clumsy and transparent. Clients I'd known for a decade would call me afterward, totally confused. "Who is this Amber woman?" one of them, Mark, asked me. "She spent the whole lunch talking about her trip to Cabo and doesn't seem to get what we do at all." I tried to talk to my dad to warn him in the clearest terms possible. I sat him down in his office, the one I used to feel so comfortable in, and laid it all out. I told him she was alienating our most important clients, that she was killing employee morale, that people were talking about quitting. But he was completely under her spell. He'd get defensive, his face turning cold and hard. "You're just feeling threatened, son," he told me during one particularly awful conversation. "Amber is a go-getter. She brings a fresh perspective that you're too stuck in your ways to see." It's like talking to a brick wall. The man who once proudly called me the brains of the operation was now looking at me like I was just a jealous and inconvenient obstacle to his new life. The end came on a Monday morning. It was abrupt and brutal. I walked into the office, coffee in hand, ready to start the week putting out whatever fires Amber had started over the weekend. My dad's longtime secretary, a kind woman who had known me since I was a teenager, wouldn't meet my eyes. She just mumbled, "He wants to see you." The moment I walked into his office, I knew. The air was thick and cold. And there he was, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. And right next to him, standing as if she owned the place, with a smug, triumphant little smile on her face, was Amber. There was no small talk, no easing into it. He just slid a thin manila folder across the desk toward me. It stopped a few feet away from me, an island of betrayal on the polished wood. "We're making some structural changes," he said, his voice flat and rehearsed. He refused to look at me, focusing instead on a point on the wall just over my shoulder. "We're getting rid of the COO position. Amber will be taking over as the new Chief Administrative Officer, and she'll be consolidating all operational oversight." The words hung in the air, but they weren't making sense. It felt like he was speaking a foreign language. I just stared at him, waiting for the punchline. "Getting rid of the COO position? That's me. You're firing me. It's not personal. Your role has become redundant," he said, finally forcing his eyes to meet mine for a fraction of a second. "Not personal. My entire adult life, every ounce of my energy and passion, was poured into this company. I built the very systems, the grid, that made it profitable enough for him to even afford to give his mistress a six-figure salary and a corner office." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, maybe even shame, but it was extinguished in an instant, replaced by a chilling coldness I had never seen from him before. "Look," he said, his voice suddenly hard as steel. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. "You built the system, I'll give you that. But I own the company. I own the trucks, I own the warehouse, and I own that system. It belongs to me. And I'm taking it in a new direction." That single sentence hit me like a physical blow. It knocked the air out of my lungs. It was him, in the cruelest way possible, telling me that my loyalty, my sacrifice, my entire life's work, it all meant nothing. That I was just a disposable tool he was done using. And Amber just stood there, gloating silently, soaking in her victory. A strange, unnatural sense of calm washed over me. There was nothing left to say. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. My dignity was the only thing I had left. I just nodded slowly, turned around without another word, and walked out of his office. As I was quietly packing my personal things, a picture of my mom, a few books, a coffee mug, into a small cardboard box at my desk, two stone-faced security guards showed up. They were to escort me out of the building. In front of everyone. In front of the team I had built. The humiliation was absolute and complete. Driving away from that building, the one that had been my second home for 15 years, I wasn't just sad or angry. It was a cold, sharp, and clarifying fury. My dad was right about one thing: he owned the trucks in the warehouse. But he was dead wrong about the company's most valuable asset. It wasn't the software I built. It wasn't the name on the door. It was the unshakable trust I'd built with every single one of our clients. And that was mine. He couldn't fire me from that. I went home and deposited their insulting severance check without a fight. For the next 2 weeks I went dark. I didn't answer calls from anyone at the company. I let them think I was at home, crushed and defeated. In reality, I was in a state of pure focus. I was planning. I spent those 2 weeks working more intensely than I ever had in my life. I registered a new company, Apex Strategic Logistics. The name felt right. Lean, powerful, and to the point. I got a line of credit with my own savings, the money I'd been setting aside for a house. I didn't need a fancy office or a huge staff. My business model was leaner, smarter. I would be the logistical brain, the consultant, and I'd subcontract the actual hauling to trusted, independent carriers I'd known for years. People who were also tired of my dad's new direction. My sales pitch was going to be simple and devastatingly effective. Better service, smarter logistics, and the personal touch they had lost. I had a lawyer look at my non-compete agreement. It was a joke, a boilerplate template my dad had downloaded from the internet a decade ago. It was vague and unenforceable. It couldn't stop me from working in logistics. More importantly, no contract in the world can stop a client from choosing who they want to work with. On week 3, the planning was over. It was time for execution. I started making calls. I was calm, cool, and professional. No bad-mouthing, no drama. I started with our biggest and most important client, Mark, whose company made up almost 30% of my dad's annual revenue. "Hey Mark," I said, my heart pounding just a little. "It's me. I'm calling to let you know I'm no longer with Miller & Son. I've actually just launched my own consulting firm." There was a short pause on the other end. "What? You're gone? You are Miller & Son. What on earth happened?" I kept it brief and professional. Let's just say my father and I had a fundamental difference in management philosophy. "Listen, I'm not calling to gossip. I know your big Q3 schedule is about to get crazy, and I have a new routing system I've developed that I am confident can save you at least 15% on your freight costs, maybe more." He didn't even hesitate. "Send me the proposal right now. Honestly, that Amber woman has been an absolute nightmare to deal with. She's arrogant and has no idea what she's doing. If you're on your own, we're with you. 100%. It was like opening a floodgate. That one phone call was all it took. One by one, I called every single client I had ever worked with. The story was the same every single time. Their loyalty was to me, the person who solved their problems, not to the company name. They were fed up with an incompetent new manager who didn't understand their business and treated them like numbers on a spreadsheet. In one single breathtaking month, I methodically and legally took over 80% of Miller & Son's entire client base. The collapse of Miller & Son Logistics was faster and more brutal than I ever could have imagined. Without the clients, the company was just a hollowed-out shell. My dad had the trucks, the warehouse, and the software, but he had no customers to serve. His revenue didn't just dip, it fell off a cliff. He and Amber, now in charge of everything, had absolutely no clue how to handle the complex minute-by-minute logistics that I used to manage in my sleep. Shipments were missed. The wrong products went to the wrong warehouses. Angry calls from the few remaining clients went unanswered. They tried to slash prices to win clients back, offering ridiculously low rates. But it was too late. The trust was gone and they had nothing else to offer. Business, especially logistics, is built on reliability, and they had proven themselves to be completely unreliable. About 2 months after I left, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway. It was my dad. His voice was almost unrecognizable. He was rambling, panicked, and utterly broken. He told me the bank was calling in their loans, that the company was weeks away from bankruptcy. He begged me to come back. He said he'd fire Amber that very day, that he'd give me a majority stake in the company, a massive salary, anything I wanted. I let him finish his whole desperate, pathetic pitch. I listened to every last word. Then I took a long, slow breath. "No," I said calmly and clearly. "You made your choice. I tried to warn you and you didn't listen. You stood in your office and you told me that you owned the company. Well, now you can own its failure." I hung up the phone and blocked his number. I haven't spoken to him since. Today, Apex Strategic Logistics is crushing it. I have a small, brilliant team of people who are passionate about what they do. We just moved into a beautiful new office downtown, one with a view. Our profits in our first year have already blown past what Miller & Son made in its best year ever. That company, my father's company, officially filed for bankruptcy about 6 months ago. Last I heard from old industry contacts, my dad had to sell the family home, the one I grew up in, just to cover the mountain of business debts he had accumulated. And Amber? She was gone the second the money dried up. No surprise there. I never set out with the intention of destroying my father or his business. But I absolutely set out to prove my own worth. He taught me a valuable, if painful, lesson that day he fired me. Loyalty is the most valuable currency in business and in life, and it's something you have to earn every single day. It can't be bought, it can't be demanded, and it certainly can't be inherited. Betrayal from your own family just hits different, doesn't it? It leaves a scar that other things don't. So I have to ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have taken him back? Would you have done the same thing? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about people getting the last laugh and justice being served, make sure to like this video, share and subscribe for more. Thanks for listening.